Hello, everyone. Before we start our lesson today, I just want to take a brief moment to talk about why we do what we do. Obviously, this week has forced the United States to re examine some very important truths about the inequality that we've been content with for a long time. And it got me thinking about the classes that I teach. Obviously, I am primarily an English teacher, and obviously, English is a subject that very obviously opens up conversations about race and equality. Think To Kill a Mockingbird, Things Fall Apart, on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, if you guys still read that one. But I also teach you guys, right? I also teach geography, and I want to remind you guys that you have a duty to the people around you to educate yourself. You are very fortunate right now to be students where teachers are literally feeding you information, but don't let it stop there. I'm going to teach you about India and Indonesia today, but I mean, even earlier this week, we talked about China and the struggles going on in Hong Kong right now. We talked about South Africa, the conflicts that happen in Israel. Do you guys remember the beginning of the year when we talked about North American core values? And I was so impressed with how you guys were able to look at those values, recognize that you hold them in some sort of way, but then also challenge them and figure out how those values might fall short of upholding, Christ-like love or even real justice or promoting true equality. We've learned a lot of things throughout this year, and I'm sure throughout your whole high school years that you've had. We've learned a lot of things that can act as doorways for you to better understand the people who live around the world. But it has to start with a humble understanding of your own self and your own culture, recognizing that we are not perfect, right? There are struggles around the world that are vitally important for you to know about and learn how to support. But we need to make sure that we don't let other people's struggles blind us to our own shortcomings. It's so much easier to point out when other people do something wrong than when we're the ones doing the wrong thing, when we are the ones turning a blind eye to something that we know is wrong. All this to say, I really encourage you to let what you learn be a gateway that leads you to more humble learning. It's really important to go to the source. It's important to listen to the people who have been hurt and make sure that we don't silence them or dismiss their voices as irrelevant because they are vitally relevant and important. So, as your teacher, I hope and I pray that I can help you understand that you should never just assume that you understand the entirety of someone's experience simply because you know a few facts about them or where they're from. And so that's kind of, I just wanted to get that out there because I think it's important to think about. I'm sure you guys are a little bit inundated with messages like that, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It just means it's super important. So, transitioning from that, today we're talking about India and Indonesia. Obviously, this fly through Asia has been pretty quick because our semester ended up being cut short by about 2 weeks more than usual. So we're starting with India. India and Indonesia are both very influential countries. We don't usually think of Indonesia as being super important, but I'm going to tell you that it is. So India, here we go. The capital is New Delhi, which it's not super fun fact, but it is notably the most polluted city in the world. But considering that India is the second most populated country and the population of India is higher than the entire Western Hemisphere, it's not super surprising that a huge population would result in more pollution. But also, that goes back to industrial practices and things like that. They speak Hindi and English, and as you can see from the pie chart, the population is overwhelmingly Hindu, but they also have a decently high Islamic population. The only cultural factor that I'm really going to talk about is power distance. As you can see from the chart, most of the cultural factors are pretty mid-range, except for indulgence, which is pretty low. They're a very restrained culture. But power distance, India is known for having an appreciation of hierarchy and a top-down structure for power in society and organizations. Think about the caste system. This goes back to some religious beliefs of, you're incarnated over and over again, and you get reincarnated into whatever level of society your past self earned. And you can move up or down, but that belief translates into how their society acts towards power, which makes sense. Because the idea is, if someone has earned a position of authority, then you need to respect that, and you need to have that proper relationship between a boss and a subordinate. Important people, Mahatma Gandhi. I am sure that you have heard something about Gandhi, but I am not sure if you've actually ever been taught about who Gandhi was. So Gandhi was an Indian lawyer. He was an anti-colonial nationalist and political ethicist. So basically, India was under the control of Great Britain, and Gandhi said, you know what, this is wrong. They should not have so much control over a country that is nowhere near where they actually are. They need to go back home, and I'm going to protest for our freedom. So he had a few different ways of protesting. One of them was he marched to the sea. He started, I think, in New Delhi and just walked, and a bunch of people followed him, and that was a pretty powerful move. But also he did a number of hunger strikes. It's estimated that he did about 17. The longest hunger strike lasted for 21 days. And this, you might think, well, what good does that do? But it actually inspired a lot of movements, and it advocated for civil rights in India and around the world in a way that people hadn't really experienced before. And it was a very powerful symbol. And I mean, similar, he's kind of like the Indian MLK, where his protests were kind of, they created this cascade effect. He died in 1948 in New Delhi by assassination. Some major landmarks of India. Obviously, you've heard of the Taj Mahal, but what is it? So the Taj Mahal was commissioned in 1632 as a mausoleum. Yes, it's a bougie tomb to house the body of the emperor's wife. And her name was Mumtaz Mahal, which gives the Taj Mahal its name. It's considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. Construction took about 22 years, used 28 different kinds of precious stones. Obviously, when you have a building that has, 28 different kinds of precious stones on it, it's considered quite valuable. Throughout various wars and things like that, they would construct various scaffolding around the Taj Mahal and construct a dummy Taj Mahal in other places so that it wouldn't get bombed. But even so, there were a few instances where people were trying to invade and they stole gems and things off the Taj Mahal. But overall, it is a beautiful and fascinating structure. A few fun facts about India. It is the world's largest democracy. It is illegal for foreigners to take Indian currency out of India. India has a greater population than the entire Western Hemisphere. I already told you that. India also has more mobile phones than toilets. They are actually pretty technologically advanced. And in West Bengal, in India, cows have to have photo ID cards, and there's actually one of them on the slide. So cows are very culturally important. It started as being a religious thing. Now it's partially religious, but also just a huge part of their culture. It's not a fun fact. I probably should have put it on a different slide, but here we are. India has the largest slave population in the modern world with over 14 million slaves. So obviously there's, a lot of factors that go into this, but like I mentioned before I started talking about India, we learn things when we learn about the world that sometimes they're terrible things, right? And we have to figure out what is our place in fighting against that. It might be to donate to a cause that, is dedicated to helping people who are caught in slavery. It might be actually just educating other people about it. Who knows, right? But find your place and figure out how to help heal the world. All right, we're going to talk about Indonesia. Indonesia, this is going back down kind of into the Oceania area off west of where your maps cut off. So Indonesia, the capital is Jakarta on the island Java. The majority of the population of Indonesia lives on Java. So considering that their population is the fourth largest in the world, Java, I mean, it's still an island. It's not huge, but there are a ton of people there. So the number of islands, Indonesia is an archipelago nation, right? So it's that island chain country. And it's very difficult to tell actually how many islands they are because some of them are so small, right? So it's estimated to be somewhere between 13,000 and 18,000. Only about, I think, 8,000 of the islands have names, and only 900-ish of them are permanently inhabited. They use the Indonesian rupiah, and they speak Bahasa Indonesia, and 95 of them are native Indonesian. We'll talk more about the people in a little bit. So we'll talk about it now. So Indonesia is divided into 5 administrative provinces that act mostly independently of the others. And of those 5, there are 30, they are further separated into 34, and they're all very culturally different. So when you have this archipelago nation in an already super culturally diverse area, Oceania, right? It makes sense to divide your country into some more areas just to make the values of your community a little bit more cohesive and consistent, because when people have different values, it requires different ways of governing, right? So 95% of the people are Indonesian, but there are 300 various ethno-linguistic groups. So at a glance, it might seem, oh, they're all just Indonesian, but they are still incredibly diverse within that 95%. They all speak the main language, but then there's also Javanese, which is the most widely spoken non-official language in the world, with nearly 1 million speakers. So just kind of some crazy statistic things to kind of work out to try to paint a picture of what's going on culturally in this area. Other things to sort of help you understand what's going on here, they're kind of a combination of the Middle East and parts of Asia when it comes to culture. Part of that comes from some religious influences. I'll talk about religion in a little bit, but Indonesia is has some very strong Islamic influences. But also another curveball to throw in there is the Dutch. The Dutch colonized, and there's still a lot of residual influence from the Dutch in Indonesia. So there's kind of this traditional indigenous culture combined with more like pop culture things, and then there's religious elements, and it's actually super interesting. I very much recommend looking more at Indonesian culture. So how did we get to this super interesting cultural place? So part of it's the history. Real quick, there were Hindu kingdoms, then Buddhist kingdoms, Islamic kingdoms, right? So right there you have 3 major religious influences. Then you have the Portuguese come in, they're the Catholics, and then you get the colonization from the Dutch, and that's where you get Protestantism, right? Then Japan comes in during World War II and kills actually a lot of the population. Then they got freedom from Japan. The US kind of came in at that point. There was a lot of violence and uprising, and now there's peace, right? So a lot of influences coming in at once. So physical geography, it's the world's largest archipelago nation, and this is where the Indian Ocean meets the Pacific Ocean. Most of the time, you have, on a map, you can see some more physical divides between the oceans, but Indonesia just kind of all runs together there. So physical geography. Indonesia lies directly over the most active parts of the Ring of Fire, which is that, well, I'll show you a map of the Ring of Fire in a second. It also lies on the major tectonic barrier between the continental plates of Eurasia, the Pacific, and Australia. So you have 3 major plates coming together, but then there are also multiple smaller plates underneath it as well. So because of that, you can imagine there's a ton of volcanic activity. There's more than 400 volcanoes, which is more than any other country in the world. And more than 150 of those volcanoes are active, and they experience approximately 4 earthquakes every day, ranging from a 3 to a 6 on the Richter scale, which some of those are pretty intense earthquakes. So here's a map of the Ring of Fire, and as you can see down here, this is Indonesia, and not all of their volcanoes are even listed on this map because you can't see them. But looking over here, this is where the Ring of Fire is the most active. You also have the Philippines up here. Just last semester, the Philippines were experiencing some hefty earthquakes and volcanic activity, and that happens because of the Ring of Fire. All right. So physical geography. Because of all of that volcanic activity, you also get some of the most fertile land on the earth. So volcanic soil it's complicated, right? Because everything gets covered by ash and then nothing grows and then like everything grows. So they have a wide variety of flora and fauna that can't be found anywhere on earth. The picture on the left is one of the largest flowers in the world, and it's known because it smells like rotting flesh. But then they also have the Komodo dragon, which is also their national animal. All right, jumping back to the people a little bit and talking about religion. So the people of Indonesia have to register under one of the 6 religions. So atheism is not an option. You have to register under one of these. You can be Islam, Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, or Confucian, which I'm guessing most of you haven't actually learned much about Confucianism. You should. It's very interesting. Or maybe just come talk to me next year and I can tell you about Confucianism. But even within those 6 religions, going back to that history, you see the influence of all of the different countries that have had a hand in Indonesia, right? Because Islam came in around the 13th century and took a major hold in that country. Before Islam, Indonesia was mostly Hindu and Buddhist, and they actually have the largest Buddhist temple in the world. The pictures on the slide are pictures of Borobudur. So now Indonesia is predominantly Muslim, and Islamic law is it's very important, but it's definitely more lax than in the Middle East. So mosques in Indonesia typically don't have that domed structure that you see in most other places in the world. And hijabs, the scarf coverings for women, are totally optional. Over the past few decades, it's become more common to see women wearing a hijab in Indonesia, but it's still not required. Whereas in other countries, it is basically a criminal offense to not be wearing a hijab. Foreign affairs, most Muslim nations get along with Indonesia. However, there is some controversy with Saudi Arabia because of some worker abuse. So Indonesia had been sending a lot of migrants to Saudi Arabia for work, but then there were reports of abuse, and their relationship with Saudi Arabia is on the rocks right now. So they also have a pretty good relationship with the Netherlands, Australia, and Japan. There are nearly 2 million Dutch Indonesians in the world, which is just a lot. And it's a very specific sort of cultural sliver of people. Australia gives them the most aid, which makes sense because they're nearby. But also, most tourists come from Japan, which is, if you remember that whole part where Japan totally attacked Indonesia and then stayed there after killing a bunch of people. I think this is kind of a testament to how countries can grow, that they do have a really good relationship with Japan now, despite some tough history. And like I mentioned, the USA also has a pretty good personal and economic relationship with Indonesia, especially after helping them out after World War II. A few fun facts about Indonesia. They have a lot of orangutans, which orangutans are just awesome and beautiful animals. They also have this church. It's called the Magelang Church, and now it's called the Chicken-Shaped Church. The dude who designed it created it to look like a dove. If you'll look at the picture, it definitely just looks like a chicken. Let's be real. So now it's just kind of this tourist attraction because there's a church that looks like a chicken. The other fun fact, this one's just weird, and I didn't include a picture because honestly, some of you are going to look it up anyways. That's fine. I just didn't want to disturb any of you. They have um, smoked mummy villages. So let me explain what this is. So you can go. Why would anyone go to this? Um, there are these villages that, if you go to them, they are it's like a staged village, but what's happened is after people die, they will mummify them with smoke. So it's not like Egyptian mummification. This is a different version of that. But these people who have been mummified with smoke, and they are sort of set up as if they are just hanging out in the village. And it's very odd. It's a very strange burial practice, but yeah, there are a few in Akim and Juwika in Papua. Um, but yeah, so there are villages of mummies just hanging out in the town. Yep, cool. All right, and on that note, that's all I have for you about India and Indonesia. Hope you learned something. I hope you guys are hanging in there. I look forward to seeing you guys at our Zoom meeting next Tuesday. And on that note, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.